The crystal glasses clinked as my sister, Sophia, raised hers for a toast. Her voice rang out across the immaculately decorated backyard, where fairy lights glowed against the dusky sky. To Mom and Dad, she said, her words honey but firm, 40 incredible years together. I'm so blessed to be your daughter. I watched her from my seat, my stomach churning despite the warm summer evening. Her smile was polished to perfection, but I noticed the faint tremble in her hand as she held her glass. She knew I was here, knew what I'd found, and still she clung to her carefully maintained facade of perfection. My name is Lena Caldwell, and for 20 years I've carried the weight of a terrible suspicion about my brother Ethan's death. Sophia, my older sister, had always been the golden child, beautiful, accomplished, in our parents' pride and joy. But Ethan was special. He was the only one who saw through Sophia's act, who wasn't fooled by her meticulously curated image of grace and charm. Now, I know why he died that summer night in 2003. The party buzzed around me with the clinking of forks and laughter, but I barely heard it. My fingers brushed against the worn leather of the diary in my purse, the one I discovered 3 months ago in Grandma's attic. It was Sophia's private journal from the year Ethan died. Sophia had always claimed she was at the library that night, cramming for exams. She swore she had no idea Ethan had gone swimming in the lake alone. But her diary told a different story. Lena. My mother's soft voice startled me. She touched my shoulder, her brows knitted with concern. You've barely touched your food. Are you feeling okay? I forced a smile, one I knew didn't quite reach my eyes. I'm fine, Mom. Just caught up in memories. It's an emotional day. From across the table, Sophia caught my gaze. Her manicured fingers gripped her wine glass so tightly, I thought it might shatter. She had been watching me all evening, watching as I whispered to guests, showing them something from my purse. She didn't know what I was up to, not yet, but the fear was already creeping into her eyes. The diary wasn't my only evidence. Over the past 3 months, I painstakingly pieced everything together. The threatening notes Ethan had received that summer, the missing life-saving ring from the dock, and the mysterious fight with his girlfriend just hours before he died. Sophia had orchestrated all of it. Why? Because Ethan had uncovered her secrets that would have obliterated the flawless image she worked so hard to project. He had discovered her betrayal, her lies, her carefully hidden crimes. And so, on that humid July night, Sophia let him drown. Time for the anniversary video. Dad's booming voice snapped me out of my thoughts. A large screen had been set up in the garden, ready to play Sophia's meticulously prepared tribute. But I wasn't going to let her control the narrative anymore. I stood smoothing my dress. Actually, Dad, I have something I'd like to share first. A special memory I uncovered recently. The air seemed to still. Sophia's champagne glass slipped from her hand, shattering against the patio stones. Sorry, she said quickly, forcing a nervous laugh. Clumsy me. Lena, maybe we should save the surprises for later. Tonight's about Mom and Dad. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. Oh, this is about all of us, especially you, Sophia. Her face paled, and the temperature seemed to drop a few degrees. Conversations around the table died as heads turned toward us. Even after 2 decades, Ethan's name was rarely mentioned at family gatherings. The grief was still too raw. What are you talking about, Lena? My father asked, his brows furrowed. I reached into my purse and pulled out the diary, its pages dotted with colorful tabs. I found something while cleaning out Grandma's attic, a diary from the summer of 2003. Sophia shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the stone. That's private. You had no right. No right? I interrupted, my voice trembling with rage. Like Ethan had no right to live, no right to expose what you've done. The gasps around the table were audible. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes darting between me and Sophia. Lena, what are you saying? I held the diary up, flipping it open to the first marked page. Why don't we let Sophia explain? Or should I read her entry from July 15, 2003, the night Ethan died? Sophia's composure cracked. You don't understand, she whispered, her voice frantic. He was going to ruin everything. The backyard was deathly silent now, the weight of her words hanging in the air. My father's face went ashen. Sophia, he said quietly, what is your sister talking about? I swallowed hard, my hands steady despite the gravity of what I was about to do. Ethan knew. He found the letters, the proof of what you've been doing. He was going to tell Mom and Dad, and you couldn't let that happen. Sophia's carefully composed mask shattered entirely. Her eyes darted around the yard, taking in the horrified faces of family friends, neighbors, and our parents. She was calculating her next move, but there was no escape this time. "This isn't the time or place," she hissed, her voice low but sharp. I took a step forward, holding the diary firmly in my hand. It wasn't the time or place for Ethan to die, either, but that didn't stop you, did it? Gasps rippled through the crowd, and I saw my mother's face crumble as she gripped the back of her chair for support. My father stood frozen, his hands trembling as they rested on the table. I flipped to a page in the diary, the words I'd read so many times etched into my mind. July 4th, 2003, I began, my voice steady. "Ethan knows. He found the letters, the proof of what I did. He's threatening to tell everyone. I can't let that happen. Tomorrow night at the lake, it all ends." "No," Sophia shouted, her voice cracking. "You're twisting my words. That's not what it meant." "Then what did it mean, Sophia?" I asked, my tone cutting. "Because to me it sounds like you planned to silence him, and you succeeded." The crowd murmured, the weight of my accusation settling heavily in the air. My mother began to cry, quiet, heart-wrenching sobs that tore at my resolve. But I couldn't stop. Sophia's panic deepened. "You're wrong," she screamed. "You don't know the whole story." "Oh, I think I do," I said, pulling out a manila envelope from my bag. "Because I found more than just the diary. I found the letters Ethan had discovered, letters proving you were stealing money from Grandma's accounts for years. You thought no one would notice, but Ethan did, didn't he? He found the proof, and he confronted you." Sophia lunged for the envelope, but I stepped back, holding it out of reach. "And that wasn't all he found, was it? He knew about Thomas." The color drained from her face, and she swayed slightly, catching herself on the edge of the table. "Thomas?" my father repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. I turned to him, my heart breaking for the pain I was causing but knowing it was necessary. Thomas was Sophia's college professor, the man she had an affair with, the man whose wife mysteriously fell down a flight of stairs after discovering their relationship. Sophia's voice was barely audible. "That was an accident. No one was supposed to get hurt. Like Ethan wasn't supposed to get hurt." I shot back, my voice rising. "Was it an accident when you removed the life ring from the dock? Was it an accident when you stood there and watched him drown?" The crowd recoiled at my words, their shocked faces reflecting the horror of what I was saying. My father collapsed into his chair, his face ashen. My mother sobbed openly now, her hands trembling as she clutched a napkin. Sophia's composure finally shattered completely. "You don't understand," she screamed, her voice raw. "He was going to ruin everything, my reputation, my future, everything I'd worked for. He found the letters, the proof, and he threatened to tell everyone. And you couldn't let that happen," I said quietly, my voice like a blade. "So you made sure he couldn't." I reached into the envelope and pulled out more papers, copies of forensic reports, witness statements, and photographs. I spent months gathering evidence. The threatening notes Ethan received that week. They match your handwriting, Sophia. The missing life ring. I found it hidden in the attic at the lake house, with your fingerprints preserved under the old paint. Sophia's knees buckled, and she sank to the ground, her face buried in her hands. "You don't know what it was like," she whispered, her voice muffled. "You don't know how hard I had to fight to be perfect, to be the one they were proud of. Ethan was going to destroy me." I knelt in front of her, my voice shaking with anger and sorrow. "You destroyed yourself, Sophia, and you destroyed Ethan in the process." The weight of her confession hung in the air, the silence deafening. No one moved, no one spoke. The perfect, idyllic backyard, once a place of celebration, had become a courtroom, and Sophia was on trial. My father finally broke the silence. "Sophia," he said, his voice trembling, "is it true?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence was all the confirmation he needed. The clinking of crystal glasses echoed as my sister, Sophia, raised her toast. Her voice rang out confidently across our parents' beautifully decorated garden, celebrating 40 years of their marriage. "I'm so blessed to be your daughter," she said, her practiced smile firmly in place. From my seat, I watched her carefully, knowing what I had uncovered, what she desperately hoped would remain buried. She knew I was here, and she knew what was in my possession, but Sophia still clung to her perfect facade, unwilling to let it crumble. For 20 years, I carried a terrible truth about my brother Ethan's death. 20 years of silence, suspicion, and unanswered questions. Sophia had always been the golden child, beautiful, accomplished, and effortlessly charming. But Ethan had been the heart of our family, the one who saw through her veneer of perfection. Now, I knew why he had died that summer night in 2003. The party continued around me, cheerful voices and laughter filling the air. I sat quietly, my fingers brushing the worn leather of the diary tucked inside my purse. 3 months ago, I had found it in our grandmother's attic, a journal Sophia had kept during that fateful summer. It told a very different story from the one she had spun for the last 2 decades. Emma? My mother's hand rested gently on my shoulder, her concerned eyes searching mine. You've barely touched your food. Are you feeling all right? I forced a smile. Just lost in memories, Mom. It's an emotional day. Across the table, Sophia's gaze locked on mine, her manicured fingers gripping her wine glass a little too tightly. She had seen me talking to guests, quietly showing them the diary, gauging their reactions. She didn't know it yet, but I had spent months dismantling her carefully constructed lies. Our father stood, calling everyone's attention. Time for the anniversary video. Sophia rose gracefully, her expression calm and poised. Of course, she'd have prepared the video herself, as she did for every family event. But I stood up as well, smoothing my dress. Actually, Dad, I have something to share first. A special memory I uncovered recently. The glass slipped from Sophia's hand, shattering on the patio stones. She laughed nervously, brushing it off. Oops. Clumsy me. Emma, maybe we should save any surprises for later. This is Mom and Dad's moment. I smiled at her, my voice steady but cutting. What I have to share involves all of us, especially you, Sophia. The garden grew unnervingly quiet. Ethan's name was rarely mentioned, a wound too painful for our family to revisit. But today that silence was about to end. I found something in Grandma's attic, I said, pulling the diary from my purse. Sophia's journal from the summer Ethan died. Sophia's chair scraped loudly as she stood. That's private. You had no right. I laughed bitterly. No right? Like Ethan had no right to live? No right to reveal the truth about what you did? Emma, my mother gasped, her voice trembling. What are you talking about? Sophia's carefully crafted composure began to crumble. I opened the diary, flipping to the first marked page. July 4th, 2003, I read aloud. Ethan knows. He found the letters, the proof of what I did. He's threatening to tell everyone. I can't let that happen. Tomorrow night at the lake, it all ends. Our mother swayed, gripping the back of her chair for support. What letters? What proof? I reached into my bag and pulled out a manila envelope. The letters Ethan found, the ones proving Sophia had been stealing money from Grandma for years. But that wasn't all. Ethan also discovered the truth about Thomas. Sophia froze, her face pale as the crowd murmured. Thomas? Dad whispered. Her professor, I said, looking directly at my father. The married man she had an affair with. The man whose wife mysteriously fell down a flight of stairs after discovering their relationship. That was an accident, Sophia whispered, her voice shaking. No one was supposed to get hurt. Like Ethan wasn't supposed to get hurt, I demanded. Was it an accident when you removed the life ring from the dock? Was it an accident when you disconnected the emergency phone? Was it an accident when you stood there, watching him drown? The crowd gasped, horrified. Sophia's voice cracked. You don't understand. He was going to ruin everything, my reputation, my future, everything I worked for. Michael was going to medical school, I said, my voice breaking. He was going to save lives. Instead, you took his, all to protect your precious reputation. I reached for one final item in my bag, a yellowed envelope. And here's what you didn't know, Sophia. Ethan wasn't just planning to expose you. He already documented everything. He mailed this letter the day he died, but it was returned to sender because of an incorrect address. It's been sitting in Grandma's attic for 20 years, and now it's time everyone knows the truth. As I read Ethan's final words aloud, the facade Sophia had built over 2 decades shattered completely. Every word from his letter was a nail in the coffin of her lies. the last desperate attempt of a brother trying to make things right before it was too late. When I finished, chaos erupted.